Let me just open up just a minute, please.
That's okay. I'm going to just set my screen up to share if that's okay.
Good, please.
That's fantastic. I will hopefully get this working beautifully. There is always hope. And let's start this from the beginning. So that should do the job. And I've embedded everything that we need. So hopefully this should do. And does that look, hopefully,
Great.
like something that you can see? I don't know what you can see exactly. Just check.
I think it's okay now, Ilona.
Is it moving? I can't see. It's got
No,
story.
not moving yet. Not moving.
Okay, let's just wait for a second. I'll reshare if it's misbehaving. I'll stop and start again if I have to. Just going to make sure it behaves. It will. One way or another, it will. You'll be able to see it, so that shouldn't be a problem. Let's try again. Okay, and I'm just going to check that it's actually sharing this screen. Yeah, that's working fine. Good.
Good.
We have it. I can behave. On a computer, if it goes wrong, it goes wrong. I'll deal with it.
Great.
Oh, I'll turn my webcam on for you as well.
Perfect.
Okay. Be very welcome. We will have today Professor Marco presenting you because, I think he will do it in a very special way. So once again, thank you very much for being with us. We have here colleagues from all over the country, all over Brazil, from many universities that are interested in the subject and work with teledentistry and other things that are alike. So Professor Marco, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Good afternoon, everyone, and good night for the ones who are not in Brazil. And I should say that I started talking to Ilona via emails, and Professor Damian always keep telling me, oh, Ilona is a very special person and you're going to love to meet her. And when we go to Oslo, I will introduce you to her and everything. And then we went to ADE Oslo. But Professor Damian, unfortunately, he couldn't go. But when I was talking to him by phone, he told me, you need to meet Michael and Ilona. You cannot leave Oslo without meeting them both. Okay, I said. And then I saw this lady presenting her work there. And when she finished, it was like everything Damian told me. Always something new, always something completely different, and bringing things that no one has ever done before. And she's so kind and always doing something to amaze everyone. And I know everyone is here looking for something new and something different. So that's why we brought you, Ilona. Thank you very much. And over to you.
Oh, that's a hugely, what a wonderful introduction. What am I supposed to say to that? Goodness, it's always such a genuine privilege to meet and work with so many colleagues. And I think one of the things about doing things differently and innovation is it's never done alone. It's always done with other people, and that freshness and almost that vibration that comes from working with other people that creates innovation. So I'm going to share some of the slightly interesting things I've been doing, and I'll probably try and tie this into education and oral health. My background is I'm a consultant in dental public health. So I've been a little bit busy with COVID recently. But in terms of innovation, I'm interested in very much communication, innovation, and doing things differently. And I think that's probably where I started with all of this. So I'm going to make sure my computer is behaving. Yay! So, I mean, some of the background to this kind of concept of communication comes from my background in public health, really. And thinking about things such as basically young people, we don't, when I went to university, we went and we learned, we had paper. We didn't have computers at university. I am that old. And the computer that came into the library was a revelation. And I now tell my children, we didn't have the internet back then. And they were like, how did you do anything? And I think that awareness of where we are, well, where we were in the past to where we are now, and thinking that what we've done in the past will be fine for now, is probably not going to work. And so that's why I've been really trying to consider how to move things forwards and do things in the future as very much a futuristic way of doing things. So, and that's really where the development of this came from. So it was about, how do we communicate with younger people? Because to be honest, if I give them a piece of paper, they look at it and that's the end of it. So in terms of contemplating and thinking about sort of, I suppose, settings and backgrounds and the lens of dentistry and communicating that space, it's quite tricky. I mean, particularly when we try and teach in that space. You think about it, when you're trying to teach students, we're often very close to them. And that makes quite a difference. And often, you can't really get a good view in. So how do we communicate that feel, that sense, and that whole sensory elements that actually we can do now in a modern context? So what I've done through this presentation is, if you've got telephones and you've got QR code readers, if you've got an ordinary camera, an iPhone, if you put the camera setting on, if you wave this over it, it should take you into this space. So the way I've set this presentation up is I'm actually going to take you into these spaces virtually in your own phones as well. So you can actually explore this a little bit yourself. So a very different concept to what we normally do in terms of communicating and teaching. If you haven't got an iPhone and you've got an Android phone, I think it's just the QR apps. But I'm assuming most of you have got some degree of technical sort of interest, so you probably are used to QR codes. So for anybody who hasn't got that and doesn't fancy doing that, which is absolutely fine with me, what I did is I created a little video of this just to make it a little bit more interesting, because when I did this presentation and practice it, I was hopping between windows and it got a bit annoying. So I did a little video of it. So if you have a look, what it is a 360 static image, which you could, well, it's actually 180 to be exacting. What we've done is embedded click points into that with information. Now it's actually, we cut out, as you can see the black in the background, we cut out the back part of it, because one of the learning points from using 360-degree imaging and virtual spaces is that you have no idea how tidy that space has to be to make it look respectable. You take a picture that way, you neaten it up, it looks fine. Try and tidy up an entire 360-degree space. It takes a lot of extra work, and those subtleties are things we've learned. And if you notice with this picture, there's a little mark on the ceiling. It shows everything. And that's one of the things about it. It's a really useful thing to have pictures and images. Now, having a static space is a really interesting place, because if you take a fixed image, you can stand there and look round. And that allows you to explore and interact in a particular way. Now, this is something that any of you can do. I can provide you with the links for the software. It's not particularly difficult. It's a program called Parallelum. It's free. And you upload an image and then you just add the click points to it. It's a really simple way of taking somebody around just a static space. Very nice to do though. And it was a good way of just taking somebody into a space and letting them have a look round. Slightly different to video, and I'll explain that in a moment. But I will say that 360 can be a bit much, we're a bit exposed. It is quite superficial, you don't feel like you're in there. And I'm going to explain how to make somebody feel like they're in a space. It does allow somebody to interact with a space. And as I say, use Parallel. I do need a little bit of help with that kind of software, and I'm going to explain how much help I usually need for some of these things, because I can code, I just choose not to most of the time. So once I'd done that static image look round, I kind of started asking a few more questions about how to use virtual spaces. And this is a slightly more advanced version of this, but this is something I can personally build. And I am actually building one at the moment for a tour for our students for an introduction to clinic, because at the moment our students are not able to spend as much time on clinic as they would do ordinarily. So it allows us to walk them through the clinical spaces and to get them familiarised with where they can go and where they can't without walking them around in person. So if I just play this little bit of video rather than showing, and please do use the links, it makes so much more sense. But this is actually, it's a bit like Google. So these are static images but sequentially positioned so that you can move around that space. And I'll explain the software that I used in a moment, but it's nice and simple. But you can create a little menu down the side. I've created the stations, and this is a mock OSCE to take students around a mock OSCE. And as you can see our clinics. So if you've never been up to Cardiff, and many of you won't have been, this is what one of our clinics looks like. And as you can see, it's dark. That's because I had to film at night when there were no patients around. Well, it was actually about 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, because it's difficult to get people not in the picture. And then once you go into this, I've created images and entire stations so that they had a video, they could type things in, they could interact in each of the stations as a mock station, and they could then get feedback on their experiences as they kind of went around this virtual space, just giving them a feel for what an OSCE is like. And as I say, if you use the QR code, it will allow you to understand that you've got control of that space. And as I say, you can go around each station and kind of get a feel for what an OSCE feels like, what the space feels like, what the marking feels like, what the questions feels like, what the answers expected feel like. And that's why we did it. And that's something that it was an idea I had, and I got a bit of help to do it, but now I know how to build this myself. There's a piece of software which is really simple, again, free to use, which you can use for this. So if you've got something that will create a 360 image, you can create this very, very easily. Oops, I'm just clicking on more buttons. So, I mean, some of the things we've built in here, just to sort of explain the levels of building. There was one piece of software which we built everything around, and the software this is built on is something called Marzipano. And in Marzipano, it allows you to do kind of virtual tours. Again, it's free, you just build it in the space. And what we then did is then you build it in one go, put the click links in, then you take the file and then you embed the other codes. And the thing that's given us this bit is something called Xerti, which is a electronic e-learning platform. Again, it's one that the university has, but we've streamed that in as a code because it's got a link we can make live. So we've got a station, and that's what Xerti is clicking into. So it's got the information link, and then it sort of streams another program into it. And the videos actually come from they're streamed into Xerti, and they are hosted on our video platform. So that's how that works. And it actually, I thought it would stutter, but it doesn't. It actually works really well. But it allows me to kind of show them a video. The thing I did with this actually was I actually got the students involved in building it. So they chose the stations and they got involved in all of the bits of building this to try, and the older students trying to show the younger students what was going on, and they absolutely loved it. And then of course we've got all the kind of practice bits to get them thinking as well. And these are some of the students that got involved in it. As you can see, they were absolutely more than willing to be filmed and to join in, and that was fun. So then we evaluated it, and I've run this for a couple of years. And one of the things that comes with this is I said, well, which bits of this work? And they said, well, we actually do like it. So I was like, phew, because that was a fair bit of work. And they said, well, the things we like most in this is we like to see the task done well. So we like the see it video, and we like to see how we should do it right. Do you know what? That's great. From my point of view, if they're watching it and learning how to do it right, and I've found a way to get them to pay attention to it, I've done my job. And then we've got the feedback videos with indicative marks. They like that too. They like I had a face to camera explanation as well. And they like the students talking through the procedure. Again, that sort of sound and video and taking into those spaces. What they didn't like as much, but it's interesting, they didn't find the drone, I have some drone footage and I'll show you it in a moment. They didn't like that as much, but they did generally, most of them found the 360 video was actually fairly important. But it was the interactions in that space that they most valued. What the video did was join the points together to make it feel like an OSCE. So it allowed them to kind of wander around that space. So it did something slightly different to what you would imagine it would do. Now, I'm going to show you something which is a very different way of feeling the same space, which is actually when we flew a drone over the clinic, we did use all the proper things for it. But we flew a drone over the clinic, and then I actually edited that footage. And what we were trying to do is show them where they were going, because they used to get lost and that caused absolute mayhem in the OSCE exams when one student goes the wrong way and then we're trying to figure out where to put them. But what we've done is try to kind of walk you around again that space. And as you can see, this kind of drone footage feels very different to this step-to-step moving around. And can you see the people in the corner? And that tells you quite a bit about information when it comes to people being in a space. But 360 video and all this kind of video, you have to make sure that nobody's around very easy. These guys said fine, it wasn't a problem. But we can also show you, this is our labs. I just wanted to show you a very different type of view. I'm just going to click it from here because I think it's a bit better. The speed of moving, you can see, very, very different. That changes how it feels. But also, in terms of feeling the space, as you can see, the drone footage, it looks a bit stuttery here, but it actually isn't as stuttery as all of that when you see it. The drone footage actually has a degree of smoothness to it, which is a very different type of moving from point to point. When I tried to walk with different cameras, it felt completely different. And I think it's understanding that when we use video, we use footage, we use augmented reality, we use virtual reality, each of these bits of film and each of the bits of content has a different feeling to it. The height, the space, the movement, the type of movement all changes the feel of that space. And that's something to consider when you're developing, I suppose, virtual content. It depends whether you want to take somebody on a journey around a space, whether you want them to walk around that space through that clicking, whether you want them to stand and look. So it's almost thinking about what is that journey, what's their height, what's their viewpoint. Because the first time I gave somebody else a camera to use, a virtual camera, they stuck it in the corner because they thought that was most convenient. And actually where you need it is often in the middle where you're standing. So it takes a slightly different way of thinking. So coming into some further spaces, and I'm just going to do this. What have I learned from these bits? Because each piece of work I've done and with the teams in Cardiff and beyond has had some learning that goes with it. So I would say sequential pictures and 360 works for a journey around a space, and I'm going to show you some more advanced versions of that in a bit. Being able to move in that space creates slightly more immersion into it between that reality and non-reality. And of course, that 360 imaging I can put into cameras, and I'll show you in a moment. And it does allow sort of adding in different things to that space, like videos, and changing that reality. I mean, from a student point of view, there's a subtle reduction in anxiety, there's an increase in understanding, and that co-production approach with our students has been really helpful. And it does seem to work well, to the point where this prototype which we built is now being used to show people around some of the emergency hospitals, and they're building it that way. So we've actually done something which has got a much wider usage, and people are going, yes, this technique works. So I'm going to take you into a different space now. I've got my lovely 360 camera, and I actually have it with me today because I brought it home so you could actually see it, I think. I actually put the camera in the X-ray machine. It wasn't on a Zappy rating, but I did put it in there. And the reason I put it in there was so you could actually, so that I could see what the patient saw. And the camera I used for that is, where is it? This small. It's a tiny little thing. It's a 360 camera. It was about, I don't know, £200-300, and literally put on a stand. And I put it in the X-ray machine. So, and again, you can actually see this better on YouTube. I have videoed this for you. So if you use this link, and this will, because you can use YouTube for it, you can put this into the viewers. And this we had a go at from the point of view of, first of all, to get the students to feel it, and secondly, for them to think of it as a patient. So as a kind of camera, and we put it on its cycle, and I'm hoping it's not going to stutter too much. There we go, it's just starting. So obviously the OPT is going around, but what you can do with the 360 camera, and I'm just going to show you this on the computer, it's not as good. You can move your viewpoint and have a look around in that space. And one of the things we were thinking about doing was adding the sound over the top, because that's what scares the patients, but also makes it feel more immersive. But with the goggles, just to take you into the space of having an X-ray taken. There's quite a good thought about reflection for students about what does that feel like? What's that space like? What does it feel like when you can't move? And I think those sorts of things can be quite useful for patients. They've certainly used it in psychology to kind of get people into a different space, imagining what, for example, living in poverty, and just putting somebody in a room and getting them to reflect on that with the sounds and everything going on around them. But we've actually also tried to use this for patients, oddly, when they were really anxious and had special needs. And it seemed like a very sensible thing to do, to send them the video link. The parent could then use the phone, and just to use it for continuous sensitization to see if we could get them to have an X-ray. I've not seen whether or not they've managed to get the X-ray on one of these patients that they've been trying it on, but they were trying to do it to see whether, because they wanted to minimize the impact on the patient. What did I learn from doing that? Stick it in the machine, and they are sticking it in those kind of cameras in MRI machines a little bit more now. And I think it's, something you can do, for example, theoretically with a student, to get that feel of what it's like to be in a particular area. And I think that's quite an important thing about empathy and understanding, and learning. Those kind of things, actually, that picture, 2 minutes to do, really, really easy. I went onto YouTube. It has all the functionality. It works really well. It's actually quite engaging for something that took 2 minutes. Things that matter, the noises, the beeps, those are the bits that scare the children, and noise is something that's really, really important for that authentic feel of a space. So I think that's something to bring into it. But I have to say the VR, it will do full VR, but that makes me feel quite sick. So as much as I can code for VR, and this will do it straight, it does make me feel quite sick. So what I tend to do is that I create materials that will do the basic on a computer, it will work on a phone, and it will work on a VR headset if you've got that. Because from an investment point of view as a teacher, it's a lot more work to do the full VR headset. You need to buy a lot more, it's a lot more investment, it's harder work. Whereas I can do it quite simply on a phone for very little, and I can create an awful lot of different things. If I'm going to do something for something fancy, I need to know that it's going to be worth spending that time and finance on to do that. So this was a bit of a slightly different thing which we did. And I'm going to take you into a slightly storified approach of how we've been using virtual spaces. And this was a piece of work which we've been doing. And this was looking at collapses in the waiting room. And we did this, and this was an 8-camera rig we used for this one. And again, there's a link here. It gives you a much better feel of that space in the video. And actually, it's really useful to actually try this link with the virtual space to look around, because it really does show you the difference between a video and a virtual space. And I think that's quite a useful thing to do. And I would deeply encourage you to have a look at those virtual spaces. So what we did with this particular one was we got an actress who was a fantastic actress, and hot tip, great actresses and actors are brilliant. But as you can see, if you're doing live 360 video, number one, the quality is adjusted. It's not as good as a static image, but you can be completely and utterly wandering around doing the other thing at the time when something happens. Now that is closer to reality because you can completely miss the event. At the same time, you can completely, it might be that you want them to see the event. So using that virtual space is really fantastic, but you have to think about what you most want them to focus on, because they may miss the bit you want them to see. What we then did was we started to have a play with trying to figure out how to do something even more complicated, which was how do we make somebody feel like they're doing research, the shout, the shake. And this was spectacular, and this is shot in 360, but actually you don't need the 360 for this. And that's quite an interesting thought. That's the shake on the shoulder. Are you awake? And I'm just showing you it does move around. And then open the airway. And as you can see, it's kind of how do you get someone then, because we were planning on adding the click interactions to shout and shake, and so that you're almost touching the bits on the interactions on the computer. And this is what this bit of film was built for. So, and I'll just show you the kind of bits that this was how it all kind of comes together. Now this is really quite complicated, and that's why it's not finished. But I'm just showing you kind of the bare bones of this. So these things are great, but they do take ages, and they take a lot of thinking and a lot of faffing about to pull them together. So here's the original bit of film. And what you'll see, if I skip it forward very slightly, there we go. What happens next is we've got this up here. Now I'm going to pause this very slightly. And what you've got here is click buttons. So you can kind of look around the room. You can try and find the right things to help you. But also you've got a timer button. Now, if you add timers and sound and everything else, and you're looking around trying to do things, what we're creating is a sense of tension. And that puts them under a little bit of pressure, and that creates a different environment to try and get students to interact in, which actually is quite a special thing to try. And that's what we've been building with this, is very much, do you want to go over and help them? Decisional tools alongside the 360 video, the 360 spaces. Again, this is coded for, which can go into a full kind of augmented reality if you really want, like full virtual reality if you wanted to. Do you need it? I'm not entirely sure, but whichever way it is, it takes you into that space, and it's something we've been playing with to see, how far can we take this. And that's all really beautiful and complicated. On the same day, we spent 5 minutes filming this. Now, I apologise in advance for the sound, but it is worth watching.
Excuse me, how much longer is it going to be? I'm sorry, that's not good enough. We can need 45 minutes. No, I'm not happy about that at all.
Is there somebody I can complain to? This really isn't good enough. I'm meant to be in work right now. Yeah, you can provide me with an email, or I'd rather speak to them, frankly. No, I'm really fed of this. Every time I seem to come here, it's the same problem. Why couldn't you just run on time? 45 minutes though? Don't put so many appointments in. Just to get as many people in as possible, is it? More money. I can see the nice cars outside, yeah, I can. But I'm really keen to just complain. This isn't good enough.
So I won't play the whole thing. You can see it if you wish to, but he's a shout. I've used this with my students. I give them a primer of there are 4 patients in the waiting room. The reception has called you in. Please, you have to come up with a plan to do something with these ones. My students are so focused on dealing with the complaint, they miss the asthma attack in the corner. Some of them spot it and some of them don't, but it's actually based on a distractional theory in terms of, if you've ever seen I think it's called The Monkey in the Room, where there's the gorilla in the room, where the gorilla literally walks across, but everyone's so busy counting around the room with the number of ball passes, they miss the thing that's happening. And it's something I've been doing as part of training for our students to try and bring them into thinking about spaces. But this piece of film took 5 minutes. Now I can spend tons of time on loads of fancy realities. I just wanted to kind of make you think about, actually, do you really need a really fancy reality when actually my most powerful piece of film from that day took me 5 minutes? I will say the sound was an issue, and that has been a problem. As you can see, my hair keeps changing, but in terms of the actual content, this asthma attack in the corner, and I showed this to a colleague who works in special care dentistry, and she was like, "You can't leave that woman there." And actually, I think that's something that is really quite important in terms of using that video for recognition, for that reactivity, and also making students aware that some people get quite distracted. And I think in terms of as a teacher, it's something that I think is a particularly important thing to consider. So, I mean, I would say that was something that I've spent a lot of time with the learning points from. So, in terms of development, I will say the kind of self-exploration, the detail, and also things such as audio. Now, I'm going to do something really, really weird in a second. I'm actually going to ask you to close your eyes, which is going to sound a bit strange, but okay. The reason I put this in here is we spend a lot of time thinking about how we present visuals. Now, I've spoken about explorations, I've talked about spaces, bringing in interactions, understanding. I've also spoken about that kind of psychology of distraction-based elements and missing things that are important, and all of these things can be brought into training. What is really something that really, and I'm sure any of you who've worked with any form of multimedia will know that the thing that will ruin anything, the most thing that will wreck any piece of work, I can fix the film, I can fix the images. What I can't fix is usually the sound. The sound is the thing that will absolutely hit you in the worst possible way if you get it wrong. But if you get it right, it will take you totally into a different space. So in terms of things like that sound, that takes you into the intensive care unit without even a shadow of a doubt. And so having that kind of headset with the virtual reality, so if you had the sort of images going around you of people moving around in those spaces, in virtual spaces, using the 3D, using the virtual goggles, and all that space, what you create is a sense of being in that space a lot more, and that sense of immersion. So it's not just about sight. There is something very, very, very powerful about getting the sounds right. And that gives a degree of authenticity. Again, if you wanted, and this was something we were discussing doing but haven't quite managed to achieve yet, is actually having the sounds, the goggles, a chair, and then just some basic kind of, bit of cold, bit of this, bit of touch. So you end up with that kind of quite sensory experience of being somewhere. And that allows, really, that's quite a good space for a consistent experience, and B, a good starting point for reflection. Again, it's another discussion we've had about having sort of witnessing, being part of a room, for example, of a complaint or an incident. One of the ones we discussed was a racist incident in the reception area. I'm thinking, is there something that we could do to take somebody in that space to make them feel like a bystander, to make them have that sense of being in that space? And that's where that immersive sense of being in a space will allow you to take somebody into that. I suppose it's moving somebody into a different reality. So moving between that virtual and an online, that virtual and real space is something that we've been really trying to work on. Now, actually, putting sound in is comparatively simple, but it's incredibly powerful. And actually just closing eyes and having that sound around you is, again, something that's really useful. So I will say something of that, don't just think about visual, but think about immersion in terms of that space, because I think it's something we can forget, but it's something that brings that sense of real being to a space. So in terms of using more immersive realities, now I have used some of these, and there's a video on how to use this immersive storytelling. I have used Adobe, I have used some of these iClone settings, I have used some of the Kinect things. They weren't very good when I used them, and they took hours. I have tried a number of these things in the past. I think they are really good, but they have to be done for a good reason. And I think that's the big thing about, if you're going to immerse something really amazing and you add interactions, what's the value of adding that interaction? Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. If that value of that interaction is really worth doing, then do it by all means. But actually, every single thing you add into a picture makes it take a lot longer. And the video editing for 360-degree video is a lot more work and time and expense and effort than anything that isn't. So it's just about considerations of what you do. So I'm going to take you into a very different thing. I'm going to augment this reality now and take you into a different teaching space and very much a learning space in a project I've been working on with the IT Academy, with the Software Academy. And what we were trying to do is to look at sort of augmenting that reality and changing a physical space through augmentation. So we actually created a mobile application. Now, this I did need help with. So most of the things I've shown you are things you can do yourselves. This one took a bit more work, to be quite honest. And we had a number of people, and we actually did this as part of a study. And we did have stakeholders and people helping. We also showed this to some young people who gave us some feedback on it, and that gave us the ability to analyse it. So the app looks a little like this. It's just a really basic button app. And we've got posters, we've got games, we've got lots of things to do. And these were developed by young people who were developing careers in software. So what we wanted were things that were visually engaging and relevant. We wanted to turn a tiny waiting room into a live environment. Now, in terms of teaching as a clinician, I could turn an empty operating theatre into a live environment in this particular way as well, or adding videos and things. And you could probably do this with QR codes even as well. But this is just something slightly different. So what I wanted to do is engage children and take something into a different space. So this is the poster, and when you wave the app over it, it does this. So all the cartoons appear. We also had a dragon. I like the dragon. And the message with that was about clean teeth and fire breaths and things. But I am very fond of our flying dragon. He's very beautiful. And then this is the one that, because my daughter's massively into anime, looking good. That's obviously important. But the anime characters that they had these kind of poses turning to life and the messages that come with those. So what we were doing is turning the waiting room into a health promoting environment with messages that children wanted to go and see because they wanted to see what the posters did and to make them like, oh, this is really interesting. So then we took it a step further, and there's this lovely tooth here, and the tooth itself actually turns, once you see him, into a full video embedded poster. And the kids love this one. It shows the video, so the whole thing, it's like you can take a little card home and a whole load of information is all in that tiny online sort of streaming poster and in the app. And that went down really, really well. It's that kind of virtual poster with all the kind of health messages in that space, which I think they really liked that. They found that really engaging because it was different, and perhaps they wouldn't get bored if it was everywhere. But certainly it was like, oh, let's go and look at this. Oh, let's go and look at this. So I thought it was, again, another way of drawing children in instead of giving them a piece of paper, which seemed to work. They also created a colouring piece of paper for colouring for the children so they could hand out the colouring. And this created no word of a lie, complete silence. We're in the middle of trying to conduct interviews, not a peep. Apart from, could you pass me the red pen and the pink pen and the blue pen? And the reason why is this little ducky, when you coloured it in, turns into your own ducky. And as something to take home, there he is, and you can personalise your own duck and take him home, again with all the messages around that. And in terms of kind of promoting oral health, there is a kind of a really nice thing about having that sense of interaction, again, between the real and virtual world. And something we did learn in this process was also that competition works. So we created an app, again, which was Avoid the Sugar, so psychological messaging. And that worked quite well. Apparently our IT department have a scoreboard on this, so it obviously went down well with the adults and the children. And then this, which was a sugar destroyer app, and this turned the waiting room into a full 3D space with sugar floating around your head, and you had to zap it to get rid of the number of sugar cubes, and you had a timer. So a sense of competition, a sense of something in there. So there are those kinds of things in terms of building in a sense of taking someone into a space, a sense of timer, a sense of competition. Those sorts of things seem to work with the young children, and to be quite honest, the grown-ups take it. To be honest, the grown-ups are more competitive than the children. And so are my students. So we've learned that one as well. But in terms of how to make augmented reality interesting, it's about thinking about how that functions and how you draw someone in and how you get someone really engaged with it and coming back. Again, those timers and those competition elements seem to work quite well. So I think in terms of, I'm going to start sort of moving towards summing up with some of these things now. I think there's a lot of learning with this. Anything that is in terms of where you're looking in direction, you need to figure out what you're really trying to show somebody in terms of what they're looking at. Where do you want them to look, or do you want them to miss stuff and then try and go, oh, what happened there, and then engage with it? So it's almost thinking, when you move into that 3D space and create something very different, how you can do that in a very different way. I think also it's working out how much work you want to do and how much work is worth doing in that space. Because, as I say, the Marzipan 2 minutes, really easy. There's some really simple software apps, inexpensive, cost nothing. I'm sure most of you have e-learning software. I mean, most of the e-learning software is fine. I've broken most of the bits in the university at various points in time, but I have managed to get most of it working quite well. But it is a lot of work. As soon as you start getting into coding, into getting certain bits as extra bits, that ends up being a lot more work. It's a lot more expensive, and it is much more difficult to make adjustments. And it's easy to underestimate how much work it is to go back into it. So if you remember the resuscitation application, that is really complicated to do, because you're there thinking, what do I need? What actually, you almost need to walk through every micro step of that whole process to create something. Does that create a value? Is that really helpful? Or do I just use the videos which I've created for resuscitation, which show every error that they've ever seen, which are hilarious because you've never seen anything like somebody trying to put the tubes in the wrong way round. It was the resuscitation trainers going, oh, let me show you what somebody did. And they went through all of these things that went wrong. So I think there is a kind of thought about, how do you create the most value? And what is it you're trying? Is it you want somebody to spot something, to hear something, to notice something, to look around? And that's where the value is of both 360, the VR, the augmented reality. It takes you into a different level of thinking about, what is it that I'm really trying to deliver here? What is it that I'm really wanting to make happen? And is it practicable? So doing this the reason I did the 360 OSCE setting was I did that, and I developed that as something they could do on their computer, on their phones, because at the end of the day, we don't do that much stuff with VR at the moment. There was no huge value to having them going one at a time in a VR context, no value whatsoever. And you need enough units to distribute to do that. Now, if you're using it for, anatomy in a group, and there's a number of students using it, as long as you can, at the moment it's probably been a nightmare with social distancing. You can create those 3D spaces. You can, of course, use SRC files and get people to look around. I haven't actually put those up, but you can actually also create SRC files, like 360 images, which you can look around and explore. There's some really lovely ones from the University of Dundee, which are already uploaded into one of the systems, which you can actually just go in and use. So there's lots of stuff that's already there. So I'm not a fan of using stuff or doing stuff that's already been done. I'm a great fan of doing things that are new and different, and not replicating the effort unless absolutely necessary, and not spending time and effort on things that have a little value, go out of date. It takes forever to adjust. And there's one adjustment, and for example, the resuscitation, if they change what they want us to do, the counts, the number, anything, every single time that has an impact on the reprogramming of the program, and does that come out of date. So I think I'm just a bit more aware of those things now, having spent a lot more time on them. But that sense of immersion, that sense of feeling, is something that's real value to that. So what's my advice? Okay, number one, keep it simple. Whatever it is, take it down to bare bones, and then think, what do I really need to do? And then I'm going to say something really strange, which is just give it a go using the most basic option possible. And the reason I say I'm using the most basic, use the most basic bit of film and see what it feels like, and refine it, then do the fancy bits at the end. Because whatever you think you need, it will not be that. It will turn into something else afterwards. And I think one of the things that academics do pretty much all the time is they overthink it and go, it's going to be like this, and then they try and do it, and then it goes wrong, and then they give up. And I think that's something that we do that's not so good. So I think it's quite nice. So I think one of the things that's also quite helpful with this is thinking about also the practicalities for hosting. So where you're going to stream your content, the privacy settings, and those as well. So you'll notice some of the stuff we've got for 360. It was hosted on YouTube. The Marzipano, you can put it in, and it actually creates an export, and that actually uploads into Blackboard fine. So the integrations are getting so much better than they used to be. It used to be really hard to get that kind of stuff, any of it up and running. it's now working quite well. I'm just thinking about the practicalities and costs of delivery. Now, I finished a few minutes early, and I thought it might help with some questions and doing some other bits around this, and to do something a little interactive if you wish to. Marco, let's see if you're coming back.
Yep. Thank you very much, Ilona. It was amazing. I liked it very much, and I think it was very important when you mentioned to keep it simple and try to doing things that, you know, when you're wondering that you need to do something and you just think, nah, I need this and this and this. It takes a lot of time for you to, yeah. So just start doing something and you have something for you to test and to see if it's everything that you need. I like the two of the things that you showed. First one, the ITU unity sounds. And you know, when this project that I asked you to join me when I was there, and when we surveyed the students, I interviewed the students from Birmingham, and they used to say that sound doesn't matter. But then every time we show a video with sound, the first thing that impressed is the sound. So I remember when I filmed Satnan, working with the handpiece and the turbine sound. Every time someone heard this, it was like, I could felt. It was like I was there. So it's something for us to think about and to think, like I said, like the whole thing, the whole experience.
And I think that's something really that is really important, is actually about thinking about that immersion and that how you're going to take somebody into that space. Oh, though, do you know what I've forgotten to show you? I've forgotten to show you 2 videos, which I'd actually done. And this is my fault for being really dippy at the moment. So if you give me a moment, I will find the 2 videos, which I'd forgotten to show you. And forgive me, because I thought I'd embedded them in the presentation, and I've managed not to do it for the second time in a row, which is not unusual. As you can probably gather, I'm probably a bit dippy at times, but that's absolutely fine. But if I bring these videos up, I think this will make a little bit more sense, and I just have to find them, and I just have to bring them up, and I should be able to do it with screen sharing. Actually, I might, if I close this presentation temporarily. There we go. And what I might just do is take it out from this presentation. I'm just going to save it. And what I will say is that one of the things we actually did, and I'm hoping this is going to work. It's going to be a bit annoying, I think, but let's just see how we go with this. One of the things we actually got the computer students to do, and this is, oh dear, this is not looking good. Okay, no, that's fine. Is that we got the students to actually look at providing a immersive environment for our young people. So I'm just going to see if I can share this window with you, because I think this might help a little. There we go, application window. Here we go. So we've set a task to take somebody around the dental hospital in a virtual space, and what they actually did was they created an augmented space for children. And this is again through an app and everything else. I actually have 4 of these apps. And this is actually in Welsh and English as well, if you're wondering why it's done like this. And they had sound in the background. And then they show you about the cleaning toothpaste. They had a whale of a time with this, as you probably would imagine. And they were trying to show what the buttons were for lifts. And then they also showed, you can have a go at sitting in the chair. Again, it was a sort of semi-student that, you know, taking yourself around. You can click in the chair, and it actually went back when you clicked on the buttons as well. So I thought this was quite an interesting thing about, again, you know, that kind of, how can I describe it, virtual and non-virtual spaces in terms of places to find yourself in terms of virtual spaces again. So it's just something to really, I suppose, share And there's lots of different ways of taking somebody into those kind of augmented spaces. And there's lots of ways of, and it's whether or not you want a big journey, a little journey. And they say even that twinky sound in the background, it does change that space. It's more than, but if you lose your sound, you can't recover. That's the one thing you can't recover.
Definitely. Well, I have a couple of more questions, but I will ask if someone wants to ask something for Professor Ilona.
Marco and Professor Marco and Professor Ilona, congratulations for the presentation. It was amazing. Well, I wonder how long have you started all that, and how does it? Let me just be here for you to see me. Also, if you had a very important institutional support, and the investment I suppose, must be very important. And if you could tell us something about that also. And for someone who hasn't started yet, for besides being simple, what else could you tell us to do? Thank you.
No, very happy. Well, I started playing with computers and online messing around, I suppose. And this is a terrible thing to say, probably back in 2013, because I had to somehow deliver an entire course in no time at all. You know exactly where I'm at now, and try and deliver so much content online. And well, I had to deliver so much content. There was no time in the timetable. I had to move it, and online seemed like a logical space. So that's where I started, and I started learning how to use e-learning packages. And to be honest, I learned a lot of the basics myself. In terms of learning to use film, I took advice and over time I've networked into people in the university, and they come and choose to work with me because they know I'll give it a go. And I've, in some ways, that willingness and that collaboration has been very successful. I was very fortunate in gaining a £30,000 grant to actually put towards a very multidisciplinary project. So some of the work that I'm showing you, I have managed to get some cameras. Some of the cameras I've got were about £300. They're not hugely expensive. And some of I've got 4K cameras, which were about £600, which were fantastic through the project grants. But we've done filming down in Law. I mean, they were hilarious. You've never seen anything like the videos in Law. But actually, there's a willingness of me to go down there and work with other people as well. The videos in Law, we took some assessments where they passed it. We took the audio, we took a transcript, and we gave it to some people to act, to try. And it's amazing how having a really high pass level performance on paper is not the same when you have somebody do it like a version of LA Law. It's suddenly turned into the most comedic, disastrous thing you've ever seen. And actually, I think some of the learning from that is actually the subtleties of film, the subtleties of what you see and what you don't. And actually, what I found is really helpful is working with my students. Actually saying, what, you know, I want to have a go at this, and they will go. If you send them away with a camera, they'll give it a go. And I have to say that really collaborative approach with the students has been absolutely fantastic. It's worked. It's a really good starting point. Funding wise, a little trickier, but I always start with simple programs and take advice. I phone people up and say, I want to do this. What do you think? And they'll usually point me in a vague direction. Does that help? Sorry.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Marco, back to you.
Yeah, I think we have other questions.
Well, hi, Ilona. Oh, it's Andresa. And I would like to thank you for being here with us. And you said some things that made me reflect about the patient point of view. So when you showed the patient sit in the chair and what does this patient see when he's here, and this is so good because you have the empathy to this person, and we are trying to do some work here with deaf people. And when you showed the sound, I was just thinking about how can we include the blind people to the treatment. So maybe one, even if it's a kid or if he's an adult, and just arrive to the clinic, and what does he feel when he just listen this and can't see anything? So maybe it's a work to do and to have this preparation for the event that is the treatment. And so I think that it's always good to learn with your ideas. And I have some questions just about the technical things about the virtual posters, and what program have you used there to have this video appearing.
So that was coded, I believe, in Unity, and I didn't do the coding for the virtual posters. To replicate something like that, I would say that what you could do is actually, oddly, and this is much, much simpler, is use a version of a QR code and actually have something as an embedded video inside, because you can create a poster and you can stream things in. But what that was programmed in, and that's where it comes into that the more slightly complicated bits of, with the virtual posters, they were programmed in something called Unity, and there were component build parts. So there were computer software people who did some of those elements for me, which I hope makes a little more sense.
Yes, you have a huge team.
No, these were students. These were actually computer students who did this. And actually, there is an advantage to having. Actually, we engaged with a software academy to do it. So it was actually creating some links between ourselves and places training students to create software, and that's how we did it.
Yeah, that's. Also, it was really, really good to go to Cardiff in this virtual reality way and to see your clinic and how do you work there. And it was really, really good to have you here. Thank you very much, and congratulations for your presentation. It's always amazing.
The virtual visit to Cardiff was quite funny because we got the students to do a virtual tour. And none of them had seen the dental hospital at the time. So they then came down after they built some of the tour, and they went, "This is really freaky, I don't know." They were really quite thrown by it to a certain degree, which is quite amusing. And there's something very strange about visiting somewhere virtually than going there for real. And then one of the ladies who was supervising the students, her child broke her tooth. And she said, "I knew exactly where I was going because you'd taken me to the department."
Yeah, that's amazing, because the people who are going to the clinic know and be more secure, and it's good. Even the kids, I think, especially the kids, if you have something for the kids, you can show them that it's not that problem to go to the dentist. So it's really good. Thank you, Ilona.
Oh, thank you so much. I think Denise has said, do I believe after the pandemic there'll be more accepting of virtual technologies and all that? I think we're thinking differently now. Certainly in Wales, We're introducing video consultation platforms across the whole of Wales, so that's very different. Virtual consultation training, something we're working on at the moment, thinking about how we train people in to consult in a virtual context, because that's quite different, even making sure that the camera's the right way around, whether it's flipped. And then things like the augmented and virtual realities, I think there will be an acceptance, although I think finances will make life a lot more difficult. But certainly, as I said, we were creating virtual tours of our clinics to try and to fill in some gaps, and even our first years are not coming in anymore for this year. They're not. They normally come up to the dental hospital and do some things, but because of the priority for the older students who are need more clinical experience, we need to focus on expanding that with COVID, with the challenges of COVID. So what we've done for their students is probably they're going to get lost, basically. So we'll take them on a tour to actually tell them where the rooms are, so that they don't get so lost. So I think there'll be a lot more. I think we'll think differently after the pandemic. I think we're thinking differently now. Oh, everyone's been quiet.
Hi, Ilona. I would like to apologize for all the noise, because I was in the same room with Andresa and my sound was open, so I'm sorry. I have one last question, and since Andresa mentioned empathy, I was wondering if maybe you should have done something like that, but if you know, or if you understand that it would be possible for us to train soft skills with our students using video.
I think that this is something to be really explored, and I think that 360 spaces and taking at the moment I'm trying to work with a project in town in a more deprived area, and I wanted to take the students into those. At the moment we can't go anywhere, but if I can take them into those spaces and get them to feel for what it's like for somebody else, food choices, the shops, taking somebody into a different space, I think there is a value in that, in terms of understanding other people's lifestyles. And to be honest, I think some students will never pick it up because they won't see it. But for some of them, I think it's something that takes somebody into another space, and with reflection, with other bits. So you need to augment that and supplement that kind of concept. But yeah, I think video, we've also used video for assessments quite a lot, listening skills. So we do the consultation and they're not graded on the reaction, they're graded on what they take note of. And that's actually that was quite a sharp assessment in terms of breaking down the component parts of what we were asking them to do. In other words, did you hear it and did you write it down so somebody actually could read it? And that, again, we used video for those assessments, and that's been quite successful as well. So I think video's got a lot of scope for things, but as I say, video can feel really differently depending on what you do with it.
Yeah, you're right. Ilona, I would like to thank you for your presentation, for your words, for your advice. It was very good and it was amazing. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone for coming in. I'm really sorry, my language skills aren't really up to much, so I was trying to read the comments, but I've not been very successful, so I do apologise most profusely for my inadequacies in many areas. But thank you so much for everything. It's been a real privilege to share, and I'm more than happy to chat with people about what they would like to do if they're interested in developing these areas.
So, Anna.
Yes, Ilona, thank you very much. Congratulations. It was a great pleasure, a great honor to have you with us. And I hope we may meet again, and maybe next time we should have started something in this way of inspired by you. Thank you very much. And, Marco, thank you very much. It was great. And I will ask everybody to register presence. Unfortunately, it's not possible to register like teledentistry. Gente, vocês não vão conseguir registrar como teleodontologia. Por favor, cliquem no primeiro, que é alimentação e nutrição, e eu vou pedir depois para a área técnica puxar tudo para a gente pelo horário de hoje, tá? Só para a gente poder registrar a presença de vocês, tá? Muito obrigada. Thank you, Ilona, once again.
Oh, it's a great pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Ilona. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.